Good evening. How are you? Well, it's nice out. It's in the evening, so it's cooler. It's comfortable. And I had two things on my mind. Uh, One is about Hawaii. The governor, Josh Green, spoke today. It's kind of an ironic name, Green, in this sense. He's an environmentalist, and he's been asked on the air to explain what went on. And after describing the horror for the people that tried to escape the storm of fire running across the land, it's funny, this thing comes back to me that when we were studying Latin, there was a phrase, fama rumpet. And the words were chosen. It talked about how a rumor could travel across distance like a fire. Rumpet, it was a Latin word used for that. And so here we have a story, and rumpet is traveling like a wildfire, which it was. And we miss the point if we don't listen to the governor and don't study the facts. Obviously, he's very concerned about the people, and he's been working hard at that. And he's gotten approval from the White House for special aid, and that's in progress. And the president may go there if he's not going to interfere with what they're doing. But keep in mind that we already know of 93 dead, and it's very possible there'll be more as they get through the rubble. And so we don't know how bad it is in terms of the loss of life, but in terms of the loss of businesses and the loss of homes and of an entire community breached by this act of nature. So, what did Josh Green say that tells us something? He described it as a fire hurricane. In other words, there was the fire, and the hurricane had been recent, Hurricane Dora. And so what it did was it moved the fire at the rate of a mile a minute. And that's how the fire was able to move so quickly. But what started the fire? And the analysis of that has been basically that non-native invasive grass was put down, and then that grass didn't have the moisture because of global warming, and because of that, it was ignited. And once it was ignited, there was no hope. Now, I've looked at a map, and I'm very curious if my observation is correct. But the worst damage is in Lahaina. Apologies for those who know how to say it correctly. And Lahaina is the developed portion, I think it's fair to say, in the western part of the land of the island, Maui, which, if you travel in a direction westerly, then you end up in Honolulu, I think at an angle. But the eastern part of the island, there are a number of parks and forests. And of the charts I've seen so far, they haven't shown any fire there. And I wonder about that, because it's possible, maybe even likely, that none of this non-native invasive species of grass was planted there. So that's the kind of question that would be interesting to know. Now, the terrible analogy of this, and I may have mentioned it, I think I did mention it yesterday, is that the Dust Bowl had a similar origin. They were putting down grass that required more moisture than was available. And so finally it just gave out after a couple of seasons. And then you had this dust, and the dust blew in the wind, and it blew from one coast to the other. It must have been something to see in the sky. And so here we are in Hawaii, and Governor Green is saying the world, the planet, has to look at what's happened here, because this fire hurricane phenomenon will be repeated around the planet. What does it take for people to decide that their government must do something about this? Because frankly, there's no place else to go. There are fictional trips being made in Hollywood movies, and maybe someday that will happen. But it ain't going to happen in time to save us from ourselves. So we have to do something about this, and we have to do it soon. So if you wonder what would it take for people to do something in terms of saving people, keep in mind that near the fires, the temperatures were 1,000 degrees. So if you have a temperature of 1,000 degrees, how close can you get to that? It's interesting, I don't know, this other analogy came to mind. We all probably remember the horrible choices people in the Twin Towers made. Did they stay in the building with the amazing heat, or did they jump out of the building? And there were many who did. They jumped out of the building to avoid the heat. The whole planet is warming. It's making a difference. It is responsible for winds going faster. It's responsible for the air holding moisture. It can carry long distances as it did in Texas, and then sit over Texas and just hold it there, dropping water, volumes of water after water. So this is no passing fad. This is not just some exceptional natural occurrence. This is as a result of global warming, as a result of bad choices, and we're going to see more of it. And so the symbolism of politicians doing little things for us in the environment or elsewhere is not enough. They have to do the real job. They have to do the real thing, and they're not doing it. Now, I also, the second thing that comes to mind is, I don't know if you've seen or read about Prometheus mentioned these days because of our revisiting the bomb that was dropped at the end of the war. We have to look at that carefully, because after the war was over and the deed had been done in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and all the people died immediately or had radiation burns that killed them in the days afterwards, and some linger into things after that. Now, the very interesting lesson there is that Oppenheimer, who was lauded and on the cover of magazines for helping to end the war, and the truth be told, he repeatedly stated that his job was to help find this bomb before the Germans did or the Russians did, and they did. And I think he was glad that it wasn't his decision to drop it, although there was a discussion about targets, and they wanted targets big enough. But after that war, what did he decide? He decided that we shouldn't go on to a hydrogen bomb. We should pull up and seek disarmament worldwide, because someday we would kill each other. Now, we of recent days have a lesson in free speech, responsible free speech, and crazy free speech. People trying to inform the public responsibly, and those lying, trying to confuse the public. Of course, I'm talking about Trump, but this is a phenomenon that exists through time. And in the case of Oppenheimer, one of the things that they did was they decided they had to take a security clearance away, because freedom of speech is a prepositional freedom. You have freedom of speech, but you don't always have freedom after speech. And because he was such a valid voice for science and had lived through the creation of this amazing bomb, and he saw that physics had been turned into the creator of what could be the end of the earth. And they considered what would happen when this bomb went off. Would it destroy the earth? And scientists thought there was a near zero chance of that happening. And the question was, well, why can't it be certain that it won't happen? And that's the difference between theory and practice. So what they did was they had sealed proceedings. Nobody presented. His team, if you will, people who helped him try to hang on to a security clearance, they were not given the documents beforehand. They weren't given the information. And why? Because they basically were having a tribunal that was not a tribunal. It was secret, it was closed, it was tilted, and it was going to arrive at a predetermined result. How could a man who some say was responsible for leading so many scientists and civilians to save us from Germany, perhaps, first getting the bomb and killing our troops, but who got that weapon before that could happen to end the war in the Japanese theater on their own land? So, what am I saying? I'm saying that all through history, we have to be concerned about false information convincing a people that it's true when it's false, and then having bad policy that puts us at risk. So, when we talk of Trump, we're talking of him on the bad side of the ledger. That is to say, he lies to the public, actually persuades them to believe that the election was his and he should have been declared the winner but wasn't. And he has confounded our sense of law and order, because a nation that's not built on fact, not built on thought and rational behavior and logic, is a nation that's inviting its own ruin. So, on the one hand, today we're talking about the ruin that can come from global warming that's ignored as if it's just a myth, not real, won't affect us, when in fact we have Hawaii as an example, we have Canada as an example. They'll be popping up all over the earth. And are people going to treat this the same way we treat outbreaks of gun violence that kill our children? Perhaps. A long time ago, there was a play, and I was doing some acting at the time. I know, I'm acting all the time, but this was a play called Crucible, and Arthur Miller had written it. And it was about the Salem witch trials, and these children lying about who was a witch. Well, people died because of that. And I played the role, and the Washington Post wrote it up a little bit, I played the role of the hanging judge, really. The judge who was responsible for putting to death, based on these lying girls' word, that these people were witches. And a very interesting exercise, because you rehearse it enough, you're always thinking about it. It's a thinking meditation, so you get your lines straight. And they say you go off book and then you talk, and you choose where you're standing, and you develop relationships with the people. And if you get into your character, I was the bad judge, I had a prosecutor I conferred with, there was a clerk of court, and there were the girls. Well, it was about the Salem witch trial, but Miller was also talking about what happened with McCarthyism. And McCarthyism ducks into the story of Oppenheimer. And not McCarthy, but what he did is what Trump does. But McCarthy, for all the damage he caused, forcing people to be terrified of individuals based on hints and lies and so forth, Well, we have that with Trump. So how do we guard against this? We have to be the rational man or woman. We have to say, what are your facts? Who published it? Who's the reporter? What do you have to back it up? How are we responsible as citizens if we don't do that? We already have irresponsible public figures who are supposed to represent us and supposed to argue on our behalf and to make good and safe policies for us all. But that's not happening in America. We have a Republican Party with an identity crisis trying to decide how certain individuals who consider themselves potential nominees of the Republican Party, how they criticize Trump in a way that doesn't turn him and his crazy followers against whomever should get the mantle of representation of what the Republican Party is. And the question is, what is the Republican Party? People I've known who've been Republicans in former administrations are lost in the sense of, they may disagree, but they are patriots. They're loyal to fact and process, equal justice before law. No, not on all issues, not on all things. But we're not in that world. And those people, if their rational judgment reigns, will either vote as independents or perhaps not at all, and some will vote for Biden. So what's rational today to bring us to a place where we seriously consider the environmental challenge that could destroy this planet and is already working the problem against our best intent and against our own survival? And similarly, how we govern has got to be dependent upon us being rational again. And we can't say, well, what is it? In The Lord of La Mancha, the aide in the musical is asked, what do you see in La Mancha? Why do you support him? And he sings, I don't know. I just like him. I just like him. What does it take for people to like someone who has such destruction in his molecular structure? Whether it's how we deal with global warming or how we function as a government, as a republic, as a democracy. So I'm walking a different trail because I thought it might be warmer than it turns out to be. And so it's been a pleasant evening taking a walk with you. And this week we'll see if Miss Imminence from Georgia is finally imminent enough to file a case. And we'll see what Trump has done, if he's adhered to what the DC judge has directed him to do. And we'll have a menu of items that we can't afford to get wrong anymore. We have to get these right. So that's it. I'm saying goodbye from my eventide road here with some trees around. And I'll talk to you again tomorrow. Bye-bye.